Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well, especially you, to be share. Today we're going to be learning Maseches Menachos Daf Lamed Aleph. We'll be wrapping up a little bit of a sugya about Reb Shimon Shazuri, who we were discussing yesterday, because there was a line from Rav Chanina toward the top of Lamed Amud Beis about Reb Shazuri and us always paskening like him. And we have to see if that's still going to play out. So we'll actually be starting about 15 lines or so from the bottom of Lamed Amud Beis next to Tosfos V'le Mar Halacha Kemar. The words Inami Aha. And Amir Sashem will finish toward the bottom of Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. Tomorrow night, Daf Yomi will be at the Shabbat wedding. Mazel Tov to Ari and Shana on the wedding of their daughter Shalva. Baruch Hashem, continued simchas for all of us here and in Klal Yisrael while we're at it. And we'll do it right after the chuppah, Amir Sashem. So let's get started. Inami Aha, says the Gemara. Perhaps the Mari Makom, where we say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon Shazuri, the kind of like the binyanav, the first of the halachos, where we say that maybe it's the following, which has to do with Trumas Meiser Shel Demai Shechazr Lemekoma. Let's say that you had a separation of Meiser on Demai. Demai is produce where there's a suffix of whether or not the person who owns it was me'aser, if he actually did the tithe. And let's say that it fell back in place. So Reb Shimon Shazuri Omer af bechol shalo va'ochlo al piv, both on Shabbos, and he holds even during the week. You're allowed to ask the Am Haaretz if in fact he tithed, and even though in general they're not reliable people, but we're makel for the sake of Kavod Shabbos, which is a part of the Suda to rely on them. That's part of the Kula. And he says even during the week we can rely upon them. So says the Gemara, if this is the halacha about Reb Shimon Shazuri that we hold like him, itmar Allah Amar Rav Yochanan halacha Reb Shimon Shazuri b'Mesukan, uvetrumas meiser shel demai, that we hold like Reb Shimon Shazuri in a case of Mesukan where someone is sick, and also in this case of trumas meiser shel demai, that we allow ourselves to rely on the goy, to rely on the Am Haaretz, excuse me, even though we don't typically rely on them. So we hold, if we were to hold like Reb Shimon Shazuri, says the Gemara, v'im isa hu nami lema, we should have seen it in the name of Reb Chanina. Why did we only see it in the name of Reb Yochanan? So that answer is not acceptable. The Gemara then pivots to another answer, Ela Aha. Perhaps we can say that the halacha of Reb Shimon Shazuri, that was the binyan av, from which Reb Chanina learned that we always hold like Reb Shimon Shazuri, was talking about something else. 8 lines from the bottom on Lamed Amud Beis, Pol HaMitzri, a particular type of bean, Shazaro Lizaro, let's say it was planted right at the end of a year, right before Rosh Hashanah. And Miksaso Hishrish Lifnei Rosh Hashanah. Part of it was Mashresh, it took root before Rosh Hashanah. Miksaso Achar Rosh Hashanah, and part was after Rosh Hashanah. So now we have a problem because some of it is going to be Shemitah worthy and some of it is not Shemitah worthy, because Rosh Hashanah is the line in the sand when you enter a Shemitah year of that which is Aser and that which is Mutter. So says the Gemara, if that we have that case of Miksaso Hishrish Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, Miksaso Achar Rosh Hashanah, Halacha Zein Tormim Zelze, you're not allowed to be Torem from one to the other. You can't take Truma from the produce that's from a non-Shemitah cycle versus produce that is from a Shemitah cycle. It says the Gemara, Lafisha Ein Tormin U'Meiser Lo Min HaChadash Al Yashar Lo Min Rashan Al HaChadash. So how do you solve this problem? Says, remember what we're chasing. We're chasing Reb Shimon Shazuri's Shita. Kate said, yeah. So what do? You're sober garno letocho. You bring everything to the goren, everything to the threshing floor, pile it all in over there, mix it all up. And then once it's all mixed up, first at the long line, so this is a very unique shita. We're not going to get into the mechanics of it, but it's a very unique shita of Reb Shimon Shizri. We allow for this. We're kind of like a little bit of being mevatlin isra lechatchil a little bit. We're mixing everything up. So it says the Gemara, ha'idmar Allah, and this we see who says we paskin like Reb Shimon Shizri, Amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Yochanan, halacha Reb Shimon Shizri. But if you want to say that everybody seems to hold that, like we hold like Reb Shimon Shizuri, why don't we see Reb Chanina's name over here like we should have seen? Hunami Lema, we should have seen it in his name and we don't. So therefore, this answer doesn't work either. So on the very bottom line of Lamed Amud Beis, we see 2 quick, rapid fire answers, and then on the top of Lamed Aleph, we'll see the deeper explanations. Says the Gemara, Amar Papa Ashida, that we're talking about a halacha of Reb Shimon Shazuri about a box. We'll see soon what that means. And Rav Nachman Rayitzal Kamar Ayayin, that we hold like the sheet of Reb Shimon Shazuri when it comes to wine. Let's learn both of these cases. Rav Papa Amar, turning to the top of Lamed Aleph Ashida. Let's talk about the case of a very large container. And Rashi here teaches us that what we're talking about, if you just follow me in Rashi just for a second, even though we're reading it a little bit in advance, nimdedes mibifnim, that we measure something from its inner volume. Darmin and Hasam, that if you have a kaveras akash v'kaveras akanim ubor usvina alexandris v'shida tevu migdal, if you have any of these containers, shemachzikin mem sabelach, if they hold 40, that's a volume of liquid, 40 sa of liquid, shein kurayim biyavish, yatsu mitoras kli ve'en mekam, they're too big. So there's a line in the sand where this vessel, if it's big enough, it's no longer a regular kli. If it's small enough, smaller than mikvah size, then it's a kli, and it could be makabel tuma. Larger than no. So it says the Gemara, Ditnan, we have a Mishnah from Maseches Kelim. The Gemara says Ditnan, Beishamai omrim nimdedes mibifnim, that when we're measuring a volume to assume that a kli has or no longer has the status of a kli, we only measure the inner volume, excluding the walls, the inner cubic volume of that particular kli. Ubeis hillel omrim mibachutz, no, we include the volume even of the walls. So let's say that you had just under the cubic feet of whatever the appropriate terminology is for sa, the cubic liters. Again, it's a cubic metric of sa, cubic sa, and it was just less than 40. The volume that could hold 40 would not be, then that would still be perfectly fine. What if with the walls measuring, let's say the walls were 2 inches thick, top and bottom, right, left, all 6 sides. You're measuring 2 inches by 6 sides. And it's an extra 4 inches in each direction, every axis. So you're adding a lot. All of a sudden, it's not a kli anymore. This is a machlokas, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. Now, Umodim, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel do agree with each other that elu ve'elu she'ein ove haraglayim v'ove ha levaz bezin nimdad. According to both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, we don't measure the thickness of the legs and the thickness of the lip of the container. Those we ignore. Rabbi Yossi Omer, I disagree with them. Modim she'ove haraglayim v'ove levaz bezin nimdad ubenein em nimdad. I do agree that we measure those portions, that they're included in the volume measurement to establish whether or not it's a kli. Ubenein em nimdad. However, the space between the legs that's holding up that box is not measured. Perhaps we could imagine like a dresser that's standing on 4 legs. We want to know, is that considered a kli that can become tameh? Beis Shammai says we only measure the inner square footage, the inner cubic space of the saw. According to Beis Hillel, it's even the frame itself. According to the next shita, which is Rabbi Yossi, we even measure the volume of the legs, and we measure the volume of the lip at the top. And according to this last shita of Reb Shimon Shizuri, which is us, Omer, he says, if the legs that were holding up this box were at least 1 tefach tall, ein beinehen nimdad, then we don't measure between them. V'im lav, if it was super close to the ground, beinehem nimdad, then we even include that, a huge chiddush. What is and that's the case of Reb Shimon Shizuri that Rav Papa talks about on the bottom of the page. And what about the case of yayin that Rav Nachman mentions, where we're on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, about 8 lines down? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar yayin. What was the case of wine, where we have a sheet of Rav Shimon Shizuri? So let's see. Says the Gemara Ditzan, Meir Omer Shemen Tchila Le'olam. I know we're all deeply familiar with Tumah V'Tara. There's a rule by Shemen, according to Rav Meir. Shemen is Tchila Le'olam. Let's take a look at Rashi, because this language is cryptic. Rashi says, Dibur HaMaschil Shemen Tchila Le'olam. When we're talking about the status of Tumah, Rashi says, Bein Shenitzma Be'avatuma. If oil becomes Tameh from an Avatuma, O Berishon, or from a Rishon Latuma, O B'Sheni, no matter what, Have'ihu Rishon, its status will always be Rishon Latuma. It doesn't matter how it became Tameh. Avatuma Rishon Latuma, Sheni Latuma, the oil always becomes a Rishon Latuma. Why? Rashi continues, the Kaimalan. Kol ha-posel es-hatruma, metame mashken lios tchila v'shemen mashke. The Mishnah in Psachim says that all liquids become Rishon, and oil is a liquid. Very good. So that Rav Meir says, we're not even near Rav Shimon Shizuri yet. Rav Meir says that oil, it becomes a Rishon Latuma. The Chachamim Omer af hadvash. That's a shtickle bit of a chiddush. I have honey in my cup. It's very super viscous. It takes time when you turn it over. Is that a liquid? How do we define a liquid? Viscosity, is that a factor? So the Gemara says, the Chachamim hold that this din of Tchila, that it has a din of Tumas Rishon, of Rishon L'Tuma, no matter how it becomes Tameh, that applies to honey too. Reb Shimon Shizuri Omer Af Hayayin, this is true even with wine. Says the Gemara, what a weird shita. Do you think that the Tanakama wouldn't agree? I understand if you want to add honey because it's viscous, it's very different. But why are you adding wine if shemen is already a mashke? Says the Gemara, Mechlal, the Tanakama Savar Yayin Lo. Are you trying to tell me, Reb Shimon Shizuri, that when you talk about wine, that the Tanakama wouldn't assume wine is a liquid? He assumes oil is a liquid. Oil is more viscous than wine. So of course, Kal v'chomer Yisrael, that's what Rashi says. Yayin lo bitmiya. The yayin mi ikal amand omar lav mashka. Everyone agrees that it's a mashke. So the Gemara therefore says, Amar Shem Shizuri Omer yayin. He didn't mean af. He was just he's not adding. He's kind of clarifying. Wine is also in this category. And that could be the precedence that we need for Reb Shimon Shizuri, and that is the end of that sugya. We saw 7 different answers over the first 10 minutes of shiur plus the last 15 minutes of the last year as to what this line of Reb Chanina was. At the top of Daf Lamed Amud Beis, when we saw in the name of Reb Chanina that halacha is Reb Shimon Shizuri, what case was he talking about? So we spoke about a case of a ben pakua. We spoke about a case of get. We spoke about a case of Trumas Meiser multiple times. We spoke about a case of the Pula Mitzri and the Shemitah. We spoke about 2 different cases of wine and of Shida Tevu Migdal. Lots of different possibilities. Lots of possibilities.
I feel like I don't understand the original statement was everything Rabbi Shimon Shizuri says, we hold like him. Why are we going to all these cases to like find out which one it is?
Because that statement was made by Reb Chanina, and in all 6 of in many of the 7 cases that were presented, when it said the halacha is like Reb Shimon Shizuri, it didn't say Reb Chanina's name. The Gemara was bothered by that. It says V'im Isa hu nami lema. If you just look at the last line, for example, of Laman Amid Beis, V'im Isa, if you're right that we know this din that Reb Shimon Shizuri we always hold like him from Reb Chanina, say it. Hu nami lema. We should have said it. You didn't say it. So the fact that it wasn't quoted by that Amora posed a question for us. So we had to find those cases that were seemingly ubiquitous where everyone seemed to agree. Third of the way down on Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, still talking about Reb Shimon Shizuri, but not about the same, not going back to that din of Reb Chanina. Tanya, we have a brisa. It's actually a Tosefta. Tanya, Amar Reb Shimon Shizuri, Pam Achas, there was a time that Nisarev li tevel bechulin, where tevel, untithed food, fell into chulin food. Good. Well, not good actually, but it got it's a problem. So now you can't eat that food. Ubasi v'shaltis Reb Tarfon. He was a Tana. He went over to Reb Tarfon and said, "What should I do?" So the Gemara says, "V'amar li lech kach min hashuk." Go buy something from the shuk. You can just go buy from any am ha'aretz. It's the same exact produce that you're dealing with, and then va'aser alav. So you have a food mixture of tevel and chulin that you can't utilize. You're not allowed to take. You're not allowed to tithe off of that. But when you're stuck. So the Gemara says, fine, buy if let's say you have pears, go buy a whole bag of pears and then tithe off the pears. And because it's the same min, it'll apply even for the tevel chulin mixture. Kasavar, we have to skip 3 words here. Kasavar, the reason why he suggested to go to the shuk and buy from an am ha'aretz was rov am ha'aretz me'asron hein. We're going to rely on the rov. It's not givaldic. We don't like relying on the rov, but mida oraisa, we rely on the rov. And it's ki'ilu that you're doing a reasonable job of truma. That's what the Gemara recommends. Why don't you say just go buy from an ovei kochavim? Says the Gemara, when you live in Eretz Yisrael, that's not so pashut because kasavar ein kinyan leovei kochavim Eretz Yisrael la'avkiyah midei meiser miyad meiser v'havalei. According to this first version, we're going to see a flipped version in a second. But according to this flipped version, Reb Tarfon only recommended that we purchase dmai in order to solve the tevel chulin mixture. Why? Because we hold midoraisa that rov amei ha'aretz are ma'asron. But according to that approach, version 1, we also seem to hold that an Ovid Kochavim can't own Eretz Yisrael. So even if we buy from him, he can't make a kinyan. And therefore, the food that he has, we can't be mafkia midei meiser because he's a goy and he has no ownership, which means it's still produce of Eretz Yisrael and it's still chayav and truma. So it's minachiv ala pater. Ikad Amr, the exact opposite. The Gemara says 2/3 of the way down. Amar leig. What perhaps would Rav Tarfon have said in version 2? Lech kach min oved kochavim, the exact opposite. We do take from a goy. Why? Because it must be in this version that he holds yesh kinyan oved kochavim beretz Yisrael ki midei miyad ma'aser v'haveleg min apater al apater. Because midoraisa we do hold that. Again, this is version 2, the exact opposite of version 1. You can already, we've had this in Shas before. Can a goy really own Eretz Yisrael? Can they own portions of Eretz Yisrael to the point that there's no longer a concern of Meister? They're an owner now. Now it's no longer Eretz Yisrael, a grain that's growing or peppers, whatever it may be. In this second version, the opposite of the first. Why don't we say that you can just go buy from the shuk from any Am Ha'aretz? Because in this second version, it must be Perhaps in this second version we hold midoraisa that most Amei Haaretz are not me'aser, and that is why we have these two different versions. Just a story about basically Rav Shimon Shizuri. Says the Gemara, Shalach le Rav Yemar bar Shlamya le Rav Papa. Hada Amar on the previous page of Lamed Amid Beis, going back to the Rav Shimon Shizuri sugya. Hada Amar Ravin bar Chinana, Amar Ula, Amar Reb Chanina, Halacha Reb Shimon Shizuri, and then he followed that line of La'od Elakom Makom Shoshana Reb Shimon Shizuri Halacha Kamoso. So then that should be true. Af benis Ariv le'tavel b'chulin. So shouldn't the halacha also be in this brisa that we just saw above a moment ago, this Tosefta that we had from Demai about this case of, remember, do we solve the problem by Amei Haaretz? Do we solve the problem by an Akum? It says the Gemara, do we hold that way? Amar le'in. Amar Ravashi, obviously we hold that way. What was Rav Chanina's hold in? That we passing like Rav Shimon Shizuri everywhere. Amar Ravashi, Amar le Marzutra, Kashi bar Rav Chanina Misur Pshita. That the question that he's asking is so obvious. Of course we hold like him. Mika Amar b'Mishnah say no. When Rav Chanina said that then that we hold like Rav Shimon Shizuri, was he only talking in our Mishnah? Absolutely not. He wasn't only talking in our Mishnah. Kol Makom Shoshana Ka Amar. He's talking about everything. So therefore, we must hold like Reb Shimon Shizuri everywhere. That's what the Gemara seems to say in the name of Reb Chanina, that L'chora everywhere in Shas, where Reb Shimon Shizuri's name is found. Again, I don't know if this is true in Psach, but it certainly seems that way from Reb Chanina, that every time Reb Shimon Shizuri says anything, we hold like him. That is how the Gemara concludes. It was not limited to a Mishnah. It was a broad din. We're going to get back now to some halachos of Hilchos Sefer Torah. We're on the top of Lamed Aleph, Amud Beis, 2 lines down. Amar Reb Zeira, Amar Reb Chananel, Amar Rav. So a din from Rav, early Amora. Kera, if there's a tear in a klaf, Haba b'shnei shitin, that goes through 2 lines of klaf, the halacha is yitfor. You can stitch it up. Bishalosh, if it goes through 3 lines, God forbid, let's say someone's doing Hagba and they just do a really bad job and it tears, not on the seam obviously, because we don't write over seams, but let's say it tears in the middle of the klaf. The halacha is that if once it breaks 3 lines, then lo yitfor, and instead you have to get rid of that whole urea and start over. Amar le Rabba Zuti l'Ravashi. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yirmi midifti mishmei d'Rava. Ha de Amrina b'shalosh al yitfor. When we say the din of Rav, that once the tear breaks through 3 lines, we have to stitch. Lo Amran ela be'atikta. Aval b'chadata les lanva. That is only true with a very old klaf. When I was in Eretz Yisrael in February a year ago, I saw a Sefer Torah that was 700 years old. They found it in Iran. It's a beautiful klaf. I think I spoke about this then, that they had some different, the letters even looked different. Some of the pays had a lot of curved, like cyclical loops at the end of the pay, and other letters looked a little bit different. So be'atikta, that's when we have this din that when you tear through 3 lines, you're not allowed to fix it. Aval chadata, but if it was new, so then les lanba, and therefore halachically you were allowed to fix it, no problem. And then the Gemara says, when I say atikta, I don't mean what you think. V'lo atikta mamish. I don't mean a very, very old one. V'lo chadata mamish. I also, when I say old and new, I don't even mean old and new. Rather, what do I mean? Elaha de lo afitzan. Ha de afitzan. One is if the parchment was coated with afitzan, which is a liquid derived from gallnuts, and one is if it wasn't. That's what the Gemara says. That's what Rashi says. Afitzan have shachar ke'atikta. If it were to be afitzan, it would have been darkened. It just darkens over time, I guess, like an old one, and that's why with the atikta we don't allow you to fix it. But with a chadata, which is where there was no afitzan, where there was no gallnut juice, so then you're allowed to fix it. Even when you do stitch, you're only allowed to use sinews, like on our tefillin. We have that little seyar egel, we have a little thread that we use to hold the knot next to the bias. That's all animal parts. That's all animal parts. You can't use regular thread. It can only be done that way. About biguradin, no, you cannot use the threads that a weaver perhaps would use. Third of the way down on Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. Boy Rav Yehuda Bar Abba. Okay, you taught us about a kara that takes place in regards to the lines. What about bein daf ladaf? What about a tear between two columns? What about bein shita l'shita? What about between two lines, not through two lines? My teku. We don't know the answer to that question. Let us talk about Hilchos Mezuzah. As you can see in Rashi, and depending on your Gemara, you'll have different drawings on the side. We're going to lean on those. So we're going to keep one hand here, and we're also going to be following along in Rashi. Amar Reb Zeiri, Amar Reb Chananel, Amar Reb Mezuzah, Shekasva Shtaim Shtaim. Let's say that you have a mezuzah, and the parchment was written Shtaim Shtaim. What does that mean? So Rashi says that Shtaim Shtaim means as follows. Rashi is a quarter of the way down in Rashi's Dibur Hamaskal Shtaim Shtaim. Shitos Ktsaros, the lines were very short. Shita Shita Bashte Tevos. Each row is only two words. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, V'ahavta Eis. And that's how it's written, just paired words all the way down. The halacha is kshera, no problem. It's not very convenient. You're taking up a lot of space. It's much easier to, I guess it depends what kind of mezuzah you have.
Thin piece of cloth.
What?
You got a really thin piece of cloth.
Yeah, it's just hard because it's going to be a long roll, or how big your mezuzah is, perhaps, is the other cheshbon. If you have one that is a very wide cylinder, you can do whatever you want, no problem. Halachically, it's kosher. So the Gemara poses the question halfway down. What would the din be of shtayim v'shalosh v'achas? What if it was 2-3-1? 2-3-1. If you look in on the side here, I have V'hayu advarim is 2. Ha'ele asher anochi is 3 words, and then mitzavacha. If that is the structure of 2 words, 3 words, then 1 word, what's the halacha? Mahu Amar Rav Nachman Reisla Kol Shekain Sha'asa Kishira. Beautiful. You made it just like the shira of Az Yashir, which is staggered. So that should be perfectly fine. Says the Gemara, that's not a good argument. You can't say that because after all, Meisvei, Asa Kishira, if you take the script of a text that isn't the Shira, and let's say I did that to Bereshis Bar Elokim, not by Az Yashir. Oh, Shira Kimosa, or you make it similar to the Shira when you shouldn't have. Psula. So how can you say by a mezuzah that that's allowed? Says the Gemara, no. Kitanya hahi. When we learn that there's a limiting factor that you're not allowed to take text and make it into an Az Yashir structure, that's only b'Sefer Torah. Meaning, the only part of the Sefer Torah that can be a Shira is the Shira. But if in the middle of a Sefer Dvarim I decided I wanted to do that by Parshas of Eschanan, you're not allowed to do that. You cannot create a Shira in Chumash, in the Sefer Torah, that isn't what it's supposed to be. That's not allowed. But in a mezuzah, it is allowed. So the 2-3-1 model is perfectly appropriate. No problem at all. It's Marnami. This is also a din that's brought in the Amoraim. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chan, Amar Rav Yochanan, Ba'amri La. Some people say it wasn't Rabba Bar Bar Chan, it was Rav Acha Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan. Mezuzah she'asa shtayim v'shalosh v'achas kshera. This is confirming the din that we saw, that if it's structured kishira, I should say, if it's structured like a shira in the mezuzah, that's fine. But here there's a bit of a limiter. Ubilvad shelo ya'asena kekuba. As long as you don't make it like a kuba. What's a kuba? Look in Rashi. Rashi is about halfway down. Shelo ya'asena kekuba kazeh. What does it look like? A triangle, a pyramid, right? Exactly right. Ki'ohel rachav milamata v'kotzer milamala. So some kind of triangle wider at the bottom. So that's one exception. You could make it like a shira, but it can't be a triangle. You also can't make it like a tail. Very interesting language. Rashi, zanav, shalosh shtayim v'achas. An inverted pyramid, right? An inverted triangle, you can't do that either. Why? I don't know why it's called a zanav, but that's what it is. Next, Amar of Chizda, and this is going to be the last few lines that we learned tonight. The last few words, Kimei HaShamayim Al Ha'aretz. Remember, there's only 2 paragraphs in the mezuzah. There's the paragraph of Shema and V'hayoyim Shema. The end of the paragraph is Kimei HaShamayim Al Ha'aretz. So it says the Gemara, the last 2 words, Al Ha'aretz, are B'shita Achrona. They get their own line. So when the sofer of a mezuzah writes, he has to strategically set up his lines so that the last line only has 2 words of Al Ha'aretz. But where do those 2 words go? Do they go at the beginning of the line or do they go at the end of the line? Ika da amre besof shita, vika da amre betchilas shita. Some say that the words al haaretz go at the end of the line, and some say it goes at the beginning of the line. Man de amar besof shita. What's it going to say? Look at it this way. It's Kimei Hashamayim are the last two words over here at the end of the line. And instead of putting Al Haaretz here, you put it underneath. Kimei Hashamayim. And then at the end of the line, you skip the first part of the line. Al Haaretz. Shamayim and Aretz, the words will be right on top of one another. That's what the Gemara says. That Man Damar Besof Shita, that if on the last line, when we only write Al Haaretz, it's put at the end of the line, that means the words Shamayim and Aretz will be right on top of one another. That's like the Pasuk says. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, Ki Gavoa Shamayim Al Haaretz. The Shamayim will be on top of the Aretz, a remez in Tehillim. That on that last line of the mezuzah, the words Al Haaretz are shifted all the way left justified, right under Kimei Shamayim, and then keep hitting the space bar, Al Haaretz. Very good. And Uman Damar Betchila Shita, according to the ones who say that you just write it regular on the last line, Al Haaretz doesn't go pushed all the way to the left underneath Kimei Hashamayim, but it's on the beginning of the last line, Al Haaretz. Just like Shamayim and Aretz are far from one another, so too Shamayim Aretz should be far from one another in a mezuzah. We'll stop right here. Emir Hashem, tomorrow we'll pick up with Amar Rabbi Chalbo at the Shabbat wedding, Emir Hashem after the chuppah. So tomorrow 5:30 is Kabbalah's Panim, 6:30 is chuppah, approximately 7:30 Daf. Wishing you all a beautiful night.